Oh my. Oh, the walk up to Boca da Corrida is incredibly cansativo. It's incredibly tiring, and potentially it can be equally difficult to get that A star in your OCR Unseen Women in Literature exam. However, I'm out of breath. I've done the hard work, so you don't have to. In this video, you're going to get some incredible insight into what is needed to get full marks in this section. There'll be some sample unseen passages. There'll be guides and summaries of key women in literature novels, including quotations that you can embed seamlessly within your essay. I'm also going to write a A-star response for you. So let's get you up that mountain towards an A-star. Stay tuned. You're watching Schofield on Shakespeare.
Simili a degli eroi, abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove.
There will be 7 videos within this series helping you get that A star in your Women in Literature Unseen essay. Here's an idea of what you will be able to look forward to across the entire series. In this first video, we'll be looking at the mark scheme, the importance of memorising quotations, Dr. William Acton's 1865 text, the functions and disorders of the reproductive organs, and, most importantly perhaps, Dear Tess of the D'Urbervilles. You'll also get a chance to write your own mini response to an unseen question from Wilkie Collins' 1860 novel, The Woman in White. Let's take a quick look at the mark scheme for this question. 30 marks are available and you have 1 hour and 15 minutes to write your essay. Put simply, you need to show a detailed understanding of the key ideas within the passage, principally those relating to women. You should embed quotations throughout and go into detail when exploring language, form and structure. However, you also need to show an understanding of the context of the extract. The date of the passage will be shown at the bottom, and weave in points about the lives of women during this period and how we as modern readers might react to this. Carefully chosen references to other texts and interesting comparisons with how ideas and themes are treated similarly or differently will be essential. And so,
It's time now for my brief summary of Thomas Hardy's wonderful Tess of the D'Urbervilles and those all-important quotations that you might be able to embed within your exam essay.
our heroine, Tess D'Urbervilles, is brought up in a just about surviving, loving family in Marlott. Her father is lazy and becomes lazier and more irresponsible after hearing that he is descended from an ancient and knightly family of the D'Urbervilles. Following an accident which causes the death of their horse, the family decide that Tess should pay a visit to the very rich Mrs. D'Urberville, who lives in Trantbridge, within a day's journey of their home. The incredibly naive assumption seems to be that this branch of their family will be keen to offer them help and some kind of financial support. Tess duly goes, but only meets the son, Alec D'Urberville, who clearly finds her attractive. He arranges for a letter to be sent to her family home, in which Mrs. D'Urberville states that Tess could potentially be useful for her in the management of her poultry farm. Mrs. D'Urberville feels that this is a wonderful opportunity for her daughter, although 16-year-old Tess is less keen and clearly feels slightly uncomfortable about being in close proximity to the son without quite knowing why. But Mrs. D'Urberville feels that Alec D'Urberville could end up marrying her. He could make a lady of her. Tess goes and is duly relentlessly flattered, bombarded and bamboozled by Alec. One evening he unscrupulously takes advantage of her vulnerability and exhaustion after rescuing her from a potential cat fight after a dance. Her virginity is duly lost. After staying a few weeks more in Trantbridge, a now listless, disillusioned Tess decides to return to her family. On her final day, the contrast in mood between herself and Alec D'Urberville is striking. Whilst the man is satirical and laughing, young Tess is mournful and all too conscious of feelings of shame. Back at home, she tells her mother what has happened, who tries to rebuke her, only for Tess to point out her own age and the fact that she was merely a child and knew nothing about the dangers in menfolk when she went away. Tess Julie has a baby, which she attempts to bring up whilst employed in physical agricultural work. However, he becomes seriously ill, plunging Tess into a panic as she believes that, without a Christian baptism and burial, he is likely to burn in hell. In a pitiful scene, she baptizes her son in front of her younger siblings and pleads in vain to the vicar for him to be granted a Christian burial. He refuses, but under pressure from an emotional, desperate Tess, he claims that this will not prevent her dead child from going to heaven. Sometime later, Tess decides to start afresh as a milkmaid many miles to the southward, and it is here that she meets the other man who will also shape her life and fate. Angel Clare is a well-meaning, earnest chap who has decided to renounce the faith of his ecclesiastical family and learn about farming, before potentially taking on a farm at home or abroad. He inexplicably seems to be idealised by all the female milkmaids, but slowly falls in love with Tess. Tess, like the other women, grows to worship him, but clearly feels that her shameful past has ruled her out as a potential wife. But Angel is persistent and continually brushes aside Tess's obvious misgivings and reluctance. After a sustained period of time, the two become engaged, with Tess continually worrying that she should tell her loved one about what happened with Alec d'Urberville. However, her mother writes to give some uncompromising advice. On no account should she reveal all. The two eventually get married in spite of reservations from Angel's middle-class family. During their wedding night, Angel decides to get something off his chest. He himself is not pure and lost his virginity during a debauched, sinful 48 hours. Hearing this revelation, Tess is relieved, and Julie thinks this is the perfect time to tell her husband all about her own loss of virginity. But this so-called Angel is absolutely stunned and cannot get his head around what he has heard. Ludicrously, he claims, "You were one person, now you are another." The relationship is never consummated, and the pair separates, with Tess continuing to worship her misguided husband and feeling that he is justified in treating her in whatever way he feels fit. After all, he is so kind and wise. Tess goes back to her family home, but faced with gossiping eyes and mouths, she proudly tries to support herself and not apply to Angel's family for financial aid. Meanwhile, Angel heads to Brazil and has an ill-fated period trying to make it as a farmer. He becomes ill there and loses a great deal of weight. But Tess struggles even more, haunted by hopes that one day her husband may return to reclaim her, and having to take on increasingly physical labour to support herself. But disaster strikes when her father dies, which means that her family will lose their home. Their mother ludicrously states that they should move to Kingsbere, the home of their ancestors. But when they arrive with all their pitiful possessions, they are told that their lodgings have been let to someone else. With the younger children sheltering in the church, the creepy Alec d'Urberville resurfaces, having been haunting Tess throughout her slow decline into real poverty. Reluctantly, oh so reluctantly, Tess resumes a life with her first husband, having been convinced that Angel will never return, and desperate to support her family. But Angel does return, gaunt, thin and repentant. However, it is too late. He tracks Tess down to the fashionable seaside resort of Sanborn, without knowing that she has been forced into resuming a life with Alec. Tess is flabbergasted and filled once again with self-loathing and remorse. Following an argument with Alec, she kills him before fleeing to find Angel. As ever with Tess, virtually everything she has done has been with him in mind, and in her feverish, misguided state, she feels that such an act will confirm her pure love for him. Angel and Tess go on the run together, loving, bittersweetly happy and childlike. However, Tess is finally caught sleeping peacefully by Stonehenge and is sentenced to death. Meanwhile, following Tess's decree, it appears that Angel will resume his life married to Tess's favourite sibling, Lisa Lou.
Before exploring some key quotations from Tess, I just want to talk briefly about why you want to memorise some quotations from other women in literature texts. Yes, the mark scheme prioritises the quality of your analysis of the quotations from the passage provided, but remember the question. Write a critical appreciation of this passage, relating your discussion to your reading concerning women in literature. Using the occasional concise quotation from other texts allows you to make more precise, specific, insightful points rather than something vaguer or too general. AO1 requires an excellent and consistently detailed understanding of text and question. How can you be consistently detailed if you can only reference moments or ideas from other texts rather than insightful quotations? Remember also that you want to convince the examiner that you are an expert on women in literature for both the unseen and the comparative questions. One way you can do this is ensuring you have a wide range of quotations about the lives of women from a wide range of different texts at your fingertips.
OCR exemplar material also indicate the value and importance of weaving in quotations from other texts within your unseen response. The extract on screen is an OCR exemplar response to an unseen passage from Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which achieved a score of 30 out of 30. You can see references to both Mrs. Dalloway and Jane Eyre used within the single A4 page shown on screen, as well as detailed analysis of the language, form and structure of the Chopin extract. The final sentence of the summative comment is content in the form of frequent, often detailed but brief references to other texts is exemplary. So let's get those quotations at your fingertips and return to Tess. She could never conscientiously allow any man to marry her now. We continually see women within women in literature texts as victims of both male desires and patriarchal structures. In this quotation, we see Tess's feeling that she is soiled goods, unworthy of a respectable marriage, simply because she has fallen prey to Alec d'Urberville's extraordinarily persistent, shameless and opportunistic advances and lost her virginity. These feelings stem to a significant extent from her orthodoxy in relation to patriarchal structures. She believes in social rules which dictate that good women should be pure, should save themselves sexually for their husband, irrespective of whether he has done the same for her. Double standards in sexual conduct abound within women in literature texts. Willoughby, for instance, can attain respectability and wealth by marrying Miss Grey in Sense and Sensibility, whereas Eliza, the woman he seduced, is cast aside and shut off from society. Here in Tess of the d'Urbervilles, Tess is right to recognise the important place by men of a certain social standing on female virginity. When she does tell her husband, Angel Clare, about her past, he is repulsed and quickly abandons her. And if her father doubted her a little, would not neighbours and acquaintance doubt her much? Oh, she could not live long at home. In this quotation, we can see the indirect pressure put on women to conform in the way that women of dubious propriety are treated. Tess's father wonders whether his daughter may not, after all, have married Angel Clare. Of course, if she hasn't, there would quickly be terrible social stigma, not only on Tess, but her family as a whole. Victorian texts intimate that society wasn't particularly interested in the circumstances relating to a woman's private life, but if deemed guilty of sex before marriage, the woman would be stared at, whispered about, and labelled. So what we see here is Tess deliberately choosing to move away from the people who at least love her, her own family, in order to avoid being labelled some kind of loose, immoral, lust-ridden woman. The fact that she is a million miles away from such a stereotype is of no interest or relevance to the vast majority of individuals and society as a whole. I feel indignant with you for talking to me like this when you know what harm you've done me. You and those like you take your fill of pleasure on earth by making the life of such as me bitter and black with sorrow. And in this quotation, you can see Tess spelling out to Alec d'Urberville the consequences of men taking advantage of women sexually. It can ruin their lives totally, leave a permanent stain. Society judges men and women by different standards. They can both partake in premarital sex, yet the men are left to carry on their lives willy-nilly, having taken their fill of pleasure, whereas the women are left bitter and black with sorrow. Why? Because female premarital sex is seen as sinful, transgressive, whereas male premarital sex is seen as regretful, yes, but to some extent something which needs to be tolerated. Moving on now to women and marriage. Why didn't you think of doing some good for your family instead of thinking only of yourself? See how I've got to thieve and slave, and your poor weak father with his heart clogged like a dripping pan? In this quotation, we can gauge implicitly one of the key motivations for women when it came to marriage, achieving financial security for herself and sometimes the rest of her family as well. Here, Tess's mother lazily and unfairly accuses her daughter of being selfish for not following up on Alec d'Urberville's seduction by engineering a marriage. For her, and many others within her society, her own daughter's feelings or inclinations should be of secondary importance to financial security and respectability. The fact that Tess now loathes herself for weakly giving in to the persistent, relentless advances of a man she doesn't respect is deemed insignificant or not even considered. In women in literature texts, women need to marry to guarantee their financial survival. Think of the Bennet sisters in Pride and Prejudice, or the Dashwood girls in Sense and Sensibility, and if they don't, my God, they are being churlish and unreasonable. From a male perspective, one of the essential characteristics of a future wife must be her spotless character and reputation. She should be pure and saintly. Now, we need to recognise that these words are spoken by a priest who is likely to place greater value on Christian virtue than your average middle-class wannabe husband. Nonetheless, the use of the two adjectives pure and saintly is deliberate and reflects society's hypocritical, ludicrous preoccupation with female virginity prior to marriage more broadly. And so a woman might be passionate, loyal, loving, proud and independent, as indeed Tess is. But if she has been seduced as a child, then she can forget anything like a respectable, conventional future and husband. It will be every way desirable and convenient that I should carry you off at Christmas as my property. Although the novel was published more than 20 years after the Married Women's Property Act of 1870, which meant that the property of a married woman no longer automatically passed to her husband, the casual way in which Angel refers to his future wife Tess as my property confirms the power imbalance between the sexes. The man is to direct, to dominate, whereas the woman is to be passive and acted upon. She is to have no agency of her own and will simply be assimilated into the identity of the man, hence the convention of the woman taking the man's surname. The notable point here is that Tess loves the idea of becoming the property of this dreadful man. She is perfectly willing to conform to whatever role her God on earth would like her to perform. Now let's look at women and sex. She had dreaded him, winced before him, succumbed to adroit advantages he took of her helplessness, then, temporarily blinded by his ardent manners, had been stirred to confused surrender a while. This quotation confirms both the predatory, opportunistic instincts of some men when it comes to bedding their female counterparts, but also the lack of active pleasure in sex experienced by many women. Confused surrender doesn't sound particularly enjoyable from the female perspective. Of course, during the 19th century, the vast majority of good women were not thought to have anything approaching a sexual appetite, as confirmed in this amusing quotation from a contemporary doctor, William Acton, writing in 1865, confirmed that the majority of women, happily for them, are not very much troubled with sexual feeling of any kind. Diverging slightly, Acton's publication, The Functions and Disorders of the Reproductive Organs in Youth, in Adult Age and in Advanced Life, unwittingly gives excellent insight into 19th century attitudes towards the dynamics between men and women. Wives in life and in sex are primarily interested in pleasing or gratifying the husbands. And here note the list of adjectives used to describe the perfect English wife and mother. Kind, considerate, self-sacrificing, sensible and pure-hearted. And in relation to sex, she is averse to any sensual indulgence, which presumably means that she is opposed to pleasuring herself and instead hell-bent on ensuring that darling husband is sexually satisfied. And woe betide the woman who prioritizes masturbation ahead of intercourse with her husband. This is a baneful practice, a habit that causes continuous trouble or happiness. It is self-abuse for which there can be no excuse within married life for both men and women, but particularly the latter, of course. Back to Tess. You were one person, now you are another. This quite incredible statement is made by Angel Clare once he has discovered that Tess has a sexual past. Prior to discovering this, he viewed her as one person, now he views her as another. This extraordinary, disingenuous claim paves the way for Angel to immediately abandon his new, vulnerable, loving wife and avoid any possible contamination by consummation. From a 21st century perspective, it seems ridiculous that such a statement can be taken at face value, that somehow knowledge about a previous sexual liaison should alter entirely your sense of a character's identity and worth. Put your hand upon that stone hand and swear that you will never tempt me by your charms or ways. For of course, when it comes to women and sex, it is the woman who must be to blame, not the man. In this quotation, Alec d'Urberville has resurfaced in Tess's life and is now a Christian preacher of the kind favoured by Angel Clare's father. However, poor Alec cannot control his own urges or take any responsibility for them. It is up to the woman to somehow behave in a manner which will enable the man to remain calm and free of sin. Anyone who has read the full text of Tess of the D'Urbervilles will be able to attest to just how hard Tess tries to avoid Alec d'Urberville and stay out of the way of his clutching, salivating mitts. The notion that she should take any responsibility for Alec's past sexual desires is nonsensical, yet the comment reflects broader social attitudes in which women were felt to be far more to blame for the sexual misdemeanours of men. Time now for you to have a go at writing a single paragraph responding to a short passage. Your main focus should be to show an excellent understanding of the key ideas within the passage and to explore the language, form and structure in splendidly insightful detail. However, aim to incorporate one reference and quotation from Tess of the D'Urbervilles within your analysis, so as to meet the relating your discussion to your reading concerning women in literature part of the question. Read the extract through now, grab a pen and press pause. The video will resume in 5 seconds time. I think it's always a good idea to annotate and to consider carefully before rushing off 4 sides of a response. Here's what my annotations looked like. Here's my response. The passage consists of an enraged indictment of the repressive way men treat women before and after marriage. They are enemies who drag women into becoming wives, away from loving homes and fulfilling relationships with other women. Both noun and verb pit men and women against each other, with men as the powerful, ruthless aggressors and women as the passive victims. The speaker declares that men fasten women to them as they chain up a dog to his kennel, and this simile emphasizes the paralyzing, stultifying, dehumanizing lack of freedom for women within marriage, both physically in terms of being tied to the domestic sphere and intellectually. The idea of men causing women to suffer post-marriage is seen in numerous 19th century texts, most notably in the language and behaviour of Angel Clare in Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. He looks forward to the day Tess will become his property, yet abandons her once he discovers that she is supposedly not a pure and saintly woman, a course which ultimately results in her death. If watching this in the classroom, you might like to press pause now to discuss what makes this a successful response and also to compare it to your own response. How does this response meet the criteria in the mark scheme? You may also like to share some of your own writing with your peers or the class as a whole. Perhaps you have included some even more pertinent analysis or have chosen a different reference to text which works really well. Press pause if you would like to do this.